On April 18, 1942, 16 B-25 bombers roared off the deck of USS Hornet, crossed 650 miles of Pacific, and struck Tokyo, the first American bombs on Japanese soil since Pearl Harbor. Led by Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle, the raid was a tactical pinprick, but a strategic thunderbolt, and it left Japan stunned. The Japanese had believed they were invincible, the rising sun of the East, a force to be reckoned with. But all that was about to change. This was the attack that forced a reevaluation of homeland defense and ignited the chain of events that led to Guadalcanal. This is the story of how one audacious flight signaled that America had only begun to fight. Japan's descent into ultranationalism in the 1930s was not merely an internal ideological shift, but a direct and escalating threat to global peace. It fused imperial ambition with a militant rejection of the post-World War I international order. And what began as a fabricated railway explosion near Mukden on September 18, 1931, allowed the Kwantung Army to seize Manchuria within months, installing the puppet state of Manchukuo in 1932. This act violated the Nine-Power Treaty and the Kellogg-Briand Pact, signaling Japan's contempt for collective security. The League of Nations condemnation and the Lytton Report of 1932 prompted Japan's dramatic exit from the League in 1933, isolating itself diplomatically while emboldening further aggression. By 1937, the Marco Polo Bridge incident on July 7th ignited full-scale war with China, a conflict that drained 70% of Japan's military budget and foreshadowed total war. After brutal urban combat from August to November 1937 and the subsequent Nanjing massacre in December, where Japanese troops murdered between 200,000 and 300,000 civilians and committed widespread rape, the fall of Shanghai shocked the world and eroded moral credibility of the Japanese state. These atrocities were not aberrations at all, but state-sanctioned expressions of ultranationalist doctrine which glorified racial superiority, imperial divinity, and the erasure of weaker nations. The signing of the Tripartite Pact on September 27, 1940, with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, formalized Japan's alignment with totalitarian powers actively dismantling global stability. This Axis alliance threatened a two-front encirclement of the Soviet Union, destabilized colonial holdings in Southeast Asia, and directly challenged British, Dutch, and American interests. When the U.S., Britain, and the Netherlands imposed oil and steel embargoes in July 1941, that cut off 80% of Japan's petroleum. But ultranationalist leaders like Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe and General Hideki Tojo framed the crisis not as a consequence of aggression, but as Western strangulation of Japan's co-prosperity destiny. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor Plan, privately warned the Imperial Conference in September 1941,
"I can raise havoc for 6 months, and after that I have no expectation of success."
Yet ultranationalist fervor drowned out realism. To the Japanese, America seemed divided by isolationism and were dismissed as soft on the basis of race. The military high command, steeped in Bushido revivalism and belief in the emperor's divine mandate, assumed America would negotiate after a decisive blow. This fatal miscalculation crystallized on April 18, 1942, when Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers off the deck of USS Hornet, crossing 650 miles of ocean to strike Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. For the first time since the Mongol invasions of the 13th century, the Japanese homeland was bombed. But it was in 1941 that Japan drew first blood. At 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time, 353 Japanese aircrafts launched from 6 carriers 230 miles north of Oahu and struck Pearl Harbor. In 2 waves, torpedo planes, dive bombers, and fighters sank or damaged 8 battleships, including USS Arizona. 1,177 crew lost in a single magazine explosion that morning that destroyed 188 aircraft and killed 2,403 Americans. The raid was planned by Yamamoto and executed by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, but unfortunately they left out one little detail. The U.S. carriers were not in the harbor. They were at sea. Japan declared war hours later, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress in a follow-up decision on December 8th, calling it a date which will live in infamy. The U.S. Congress declared war on Japan the same day. Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. on December 11th. The attack unified a divided America, ended isolationism, and triggered a two-ocean war. In Tokyo, they jubilated, but it would soon become clear that they had overplayed their hand. The raid awakened a sleeping giant. December 8, 1941. Hours after Pearl Harbor, Japanese aircraft from Taiwan obliterated Clark Field, destroying 102 U.S. planes on the ground. At 12:35 p.m., 54 Mitsubishi G-3M Nell bombers and 80 A-6M-0s from the 11th Air Fleet struck in perfect formation, catching 35 B-17 and 60 P-40, lined wingtip to wingtip. MacArthur's air commander, Brigadier General Henry Claggett, had ignored radar warnings at 10:30 a.m. In 45 minutes, half the Far East Air Force lay in smoking wreckage. Stunned in his Manila hotel penthouse, MacArthur delayed counterattacks. By dusk, only 17 fighters remained. His 151,000 Filipino-American troops faced General Hama's battle-hardened 14th Army. His troops included 80,000 Philippine Army reservists issued World War I Enfields and 1903 Springfields, many without boots. On December 22nd, 43,000 Japanese landed at Lingayen Gulf under cover of naval guns. 2 days later, 7,000 more hit Lamon Bay. Fortunately, Manila was declared an open city on January 2nd to spare its 1 million civilians as it fell unopposed. On Batan's jagged spine, 80,000 defenders dug in behind the Orion-Bagak line. Rations plummeted to 1,000 calories since they only ate canned salmon, rice, and monkey meat from captured Japanese stores. Malaria struck 1,000 men daily, and by February, quinine ran out. Japan was on course to claim victory. Dysentery turned latrines into death traps. Across Manila Bay, Corregidor's Malinta Tunnel Complex sheltered 11,000 under Major General Jonathan Wainwright. Its 23 batteries of 12-inch mortars and 155mm guns defied siege. On March 11th, a PT-41 boat spirited MacArthur to Mindanao. From Corregidor's lateral number 10, he broadcast, "I shall return," voice cracking over static. Bataan surrendered. April 9th, and 75,000 emaciated prisoners began the 65-mile death march under bayonets and sun. 650 Americans and up to 18,000 Filipinos perished from beatings, thirst, and brutal beheadings. Corregidor endured 27 days of hell, 2,000-pound bombs from 240mm howitzers on Batan's heights, 1,000 sorties daily. On May 6th, 2,000 Japanese stormed ashore. Wainwright surrendered at midnight. 1,000 Americans were killed, 2,000 wounded, and 11,000 captured. The defeat echoed the 1898 Spanish-American War occupation, but it steeled MacArthur's Southwest Pacific strategy and hope for Guadalcanal's amphibious redemption. On this same day, Japanese land-based bombers delivered a stunning blow to British naval prestige. Force Z, commanded by Admiral Sir Tom Phillips, comprised the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales, fresh from ferrying Churchill to the Atlantic Charter meeting, and the veteran battlecruiser HMS Repulse, escorted by destroyers Electra, Express, Tenedos, and Vampire. Convinced that speed and anti-aircraft fire could substitute for absent carriers, Phillips sailed from Singapore at dusk on December 8th to disrupt Japanese landings reported at Kuantan, 150 miles up Malaya's east coast. No fighters from RAF bases at Kahang or Kuantan could be spared, and unfortunately, the nearest squadron had been gutted at Kota Bharu hours earlier. At 1:40 p.m. on December 9th, submarine WAR-65 surfaced briefly and flashed a sighting report. 2 enemy battleships, course 340, speed 14 knots. The Japanese were about to show the world why they are the masters of the Pacific. By nightfall, 86 twin-engine Nell and Betty bombers from the 22nd Air Flotilla, Genzan Air Group at Saigon, Kanoya at Thu Dau Mot, were fueled and armed with Type 91 aerial torpedoes that had been modified from naval models with wooden fins for low-altitude stability and also 250-kilo high-explosive bombs. Takeoff began at 6:30 a.m. The strike force formed up over the South China Sea in 9 plane Vs. At 11:13 a.m. on December 10th, lookouts aboard Repulse spotted the first wave, 34 torpedo bombers skimming at 50 feet above glassy seas. Quite nimble for her 32,000 tons, Repulse twisted through 19 torpedoes in 20 minutes. Her captain, Bill Tennant, conning from the compass platform with calm radio commentary, "Starboard 30, hard a port, steady." At 12:20 p.m., a single torpedo struck her port bulge amidships. 4 more followed in a concentrated 90-second span. She listed 25 degrees rolled and sank stern first. By then, Prince of Wales was already crippled by a torpedo that jammed her port outer propeller shaft and flooded auxiliary machinery spaces. Yet she fought on. 8 torpedoes and 1 250-kilo bomb found her. The bomb penetrated the catapult deck and detonated in the cinema, killing scores below. At 1:20 p.m., she capsized to port, her screws still turning. Phillips and crew of 840 men perished, but Electra and Express rescued over 2,000 survivors from oily seas. Vampire lowered whalers through burning fuel slicks. Only 3 Japanese aircraft fell, 1 to Repulse's 4-inch guns, 2 to mechanical failure. The sinkings proved battleships obsolete without fighter protection, the first of capital ships at sea solely by air power. Now the Imperium had full confidence in her control of the Pacific, and the Allied support of the United States seemed nothing more than a bad joke. Long-range aerial reconnaissance fueled Japan's blitz. Mitsubishi Ki-15 Babs and C-5M aircraft operating from Taiwan and Indochina photographed Allied positions daily. On December 7, 1941, a Kawanishi H-6K Mavis flying boat shadowed Force Z, relaying coordinates that doomed Prince of Wales and Repulse. By January 1942, F-1M Pete floatplanes from cruisers scouted Malaya's coast, pinpointing British withdrawals. The Imperial Navy's first air fleet deployed 36 G-4M Betty bombers equipped with 20mm tail guns and 800-kilometer range for photo runs over Darwin, Australia. On February 19, 1942, 242 aircraft that comprised 188 from carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, plus 54 land-based from Ambon and Kendari all used reconnaissance reports to strike Darwin's harbor. 8 ships sank, 235 died, and 30 aircraft were destroyed in 40 minutes. These eyes in the sky gave Japan tactical surprise, but overconfidence in air superiority ignored American code-breaking and carrier absences, flaws soon exposed by Doolittle's raid. In Washington, Army Chief of Staff General George Catlett Marshall orchestrated global strategy amid Pacific chaos. The 61-year-old Virginian, who had once managed the movement of 1.2 million American doughboys across the Atlantic in 1918, now faced a two-ocean war with half the resources. On December 22, 1941, 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, he boarded the USS Augusta in Norfolk to meet Churchill at the Arcadia Conference. Over 24 days of tense sessions in the White House map room, Marshall's calm baritone overrode MacArthur's cables, demanding a Pacific First Crusade. If Germany collapses, he argued, Japan will be isolated. If Japan collapses, Germany still threatens the Atlantic lifeline. The compromise, 85% of new production to Europe, 15% to hold the line from Hawaii to Australia. Back home, Marshall personally signed the January 1942 Joint Chiefs Charter, pairing himself with the irascible Admiral Ernest J. King, whose first act was to demand every destroyer in the Atlantic. When King balked at Watchtower, Marshall slid a single sheet across the table. Projected Japanese airfields on Guadalcanal within 300 miles of Espiritu Santo. Approved. Every dawn, Marshall climbed the Pentagon's still unfinished stairs to the third-floor war room, where Navy yeomen decoded Van de Grift's terse dispatches and pinned them beside Lend-Lease manifests. 1,700 Sherman tanks to Montgomery, 400 P-40S to Chenot, yet only 19,000 Marines and 60 rust-streaked transports for the Solomons. He cajoled Australian Prime Minister John Curtin into releasing Brisbane's docks and persuaded New Zealand to garrison Fiji, all while fending off congressional demands to avenge Pearl Harbor now. At night, he drafted the Unified Command Directive, Nimitz for sea and air, MacArthur for land, sealed with Roosevelt's reluctant signature on March 30, 1942. On August 7th, as Higgins' boat scraped Red Beach, Marshall stood before a Senate committee, voice steady. "We are still on the defensive. Every ship at Guadalcanal is one less in the Atlantic." His steady hand turned Doolittle's spark into sustained pressure. January 1942. Submariner turned staffer, Captain Francis Lowe proposed launching Army bombers from a Navy carrier. This was totally unheard of, as B-25 Mitchells needed 1,000 feet of runway. The idea struck during a routine inspection of Hornet's 814-foot flight deck at Norfolk. Lowe noticed twin-engine Army bombers could, in theory, clear the bow with margin to spare. But President Roosevelt was already desperate for a psychological riposte to Pearl Harbor and seized the concept at a White House luncheon on January 10th, as they sketched carrier outlines on a napkin. Army Chief of Staff George Marshall tapped Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle, famed for the 1931 Bendix Trophy, the 1932 Thompson Trophy, and a 1929 blind landing breakthrough at Mitchell Field. At 45, the 5'4" aeronautical engineer from California held a doctorate from MIT and had resigned a lucrative Shell Oil vice presidency to rejoin the Army Air Forces as a major in 1940. On February 3, 1942, under drizzling Norfolk skies, Lieutenant Commander Henry L. Miller, Hornet's air officer, supervised the first deck trials. Two olive-drab B-25Bs, stripped of lower turrets and tailguns to save 1,200 pounds, taxied to chalk lines. Pilot Paul Leonard gunned the first to 70 miles per hour in 467 feet, the second in 647 feet. Both clawed skyward at 1,400 feet per minute climb rate, propellers inches from the drink. The Navy concluded that this tactic was feasible, but only with volunteer crews and radical modifications. It was now up to this experiment to challenge Japanese dominance of the Pacific. On the first day of March, 70 hand-picked airmen arrived at Eglin Field, Florida, 80 including alternates, all from the 17th Bomb Group at Pendleton, Oregon. For 3 weeks, they practiced 300-foot takeoffs on a measured white line, low-level contour flying over the Gulf, and night celestial navigation with a $2.19 Bausch & Lomb sextant. Each Mitchell received two 165-gallon rubber bladders in the bomb bay, one 160-gallon tank in the crawlway, and a 60-gallon tank replacing the liaison radio compartment, total 1,151 gallons for a 2,400-mile ferry. Armament was 4 500-pound bombs, 3 M38 high-explosive and 1 M42 incendiary cluster of 128 thermite bomblets plus twin .50 caliber nose guns for strafing. Tail guns were broomsticks, weight save for fuel. USS Hornet slipped beneath the Golden Gate at dawn, April 2nd. 16 B-25s lashed to her deck like green beetles. Task Force 18 comprised cruisers, Nashville and Vincennes, oilers, Cimarron and Sabine, destroyers Gwynn, Meredith, Grayson, and Monson. They all formed a 5,000-mile gauntlet under Vice Admiral William F. Halsey aboard Enterprise, 10 miles ahead. At 6:30 a.m., April 18th, 650 miles east of Tokyo, picket boat Nidomaru flashed, "Enemy carriers sighted." Doolittle, already in flight gear, ordered immediate launch, 170 miles beyond the planned 500-mile point. At 7:38 a.m., engines coughing blue smoke, the lead B-25 hurtled down the white line into 40-knot headwinds, lifting at 467 feet. 15 more followed at 7-minute intervals, each pilot fighting 30-foot swells that pitched the deck like a seesaw. The Pacific had never seen Army bombers at sea. Now 16 streaked west at 200 feet, sextants glinting, bound for the heart of an empire that believed itself untouchable. The raid was on. April 18, 1942, 8:20 a.m. 650 nautical miles east of Tokyo, USS Hornet's bow pitched in 30-foot swells. The carrier's flight deck was 467 feet of rain-slick teak, now tilted like a seesaw as 40-knot gusts whipped whitecaps across the gray Pacific. Doolittle's B-25, Green Hornet No. 40-2344, sat on the white takeoff line, twin right R2 600 engines at 2,400 revs per minute. At 1,200 horsepower each, the Mitchells climbed at 1,400 feet per minute like they did in practice, fully loaded, marginal with 1,151 gallons of fuel, 4 500-pound bombs, and 5 crew. Every extra ounce had been stripped, tail guns replaced with broomsticks painted black, de-icers removed, even the liaison radio. Halsey's signal flag dropped. Doolittle released brakes at 8:20 a.m., hurtling 467 feet down the deck before clawing skyward at 70 knots. The bomber's wheels skimmed the wave crests before it rose, trailing spray. 15 more bombers followed at 7-minute intervals, the last, Lieutenant William Farrow, clearing the bow at 9:20 a.m. Enterprise's F-4F Wildcats orbited overhead. Below, destroyers Nashville and Vincennes laid smoke. No Japanese fighters appeared. The task force had steamed undetected for 16 days, slipping past picket boats under radio silence and cloud cover. The B-25s flew singly at 200 feet, navigating by dead reckoning and a $2 stopwatch. Fuel burn was 180 gallons per hour. Destination: Tokyo, 650 miles west. Doolittle's lead B-25 skimmed Tokyo's rooftops at 1,200 feet, dropping 4 500-pounders on the Nippon Steel plant in Kawasaki. 13 planes struck Tokyo, 3 hit Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. The targets were clear: oil tanks, factories, shipyards. Bomb number 1 from plane number 40-2292 hit Mitsubishi's Nagoya Aircraft Works. Incendiaries ignited 48 wooden homes nearby. Japanese anti-aircraft fire, 3-inch Type 88 guns, opened late. 62 fighters scrambled, but never intercepted the low, fast raiders. Total bombs dropped were 64. Collateral damage was minimal, but 50 civilians were killed, 252 wounded, 100 buildings destroyed, and 112 seriously injured. No U.S. aircraft lost over Japan. Crews flew 1,200 miles to China, 15 crash-landed in Zhejiang and Jiangxi provinces after dark. Lieutenant Dean Hallmark ditched off Wenzhou. 8 airmen were captured. Yamashita's men landed on Malaya's east coast at Singora and Patani just past midnight on December 8, 1941, within hours of Pearl Harbor's smoke still rising. Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, fell on February 15, 1942, after a 70-day campaign. But before the fall of Singapore, Lieutenant General Tomoyuki Yamashita's 25th Army comprised 30,000 battle-hardened veterans of the China War. And since the Allied command were outnumbered 2-1, Lieutenant General Arthur Percival's patchwork of 42,000 British, 19,000 Australians, 15,000 Indians, and 15,000 Malays were forced to retreat 550 miles down the peninsula in 7 weeks. Japanese bicycle infantry flanked British roadblocks through rubber plantations and mangrove swamps the defenders had dismissed as impenetrable pedaling, silent 28-inch Silver King bikes with fixed bayonets. The Japanese Type 95 Heigo light tanks weighed just 7.4 tons, so it forded rivers where heavier British Matildas bogged down. By January 31, 1942, Yamashita's engineers severed the 1,100-yard Johor Causeway with dynamite stranding Percival's forces on Singapore Island. Water pipes running under the causeway were ruptured, and reservoirs dropped to 40% capacity within days. On February 8th at 10:30 p.m., 23,000 Japanese of the 5th and 18th Divisions crossed the Johor Strait in collapsible boats under a moonless sky, guided by red flares. Singapore's 15-inch coastal guns faced seaward and could not depress to hit troops 800 yards inland because they were designed to repel battleships, so only 70 high-explosive rounds were fired all campaign. On the other hand, Percival was expecting an attack from the northeast, so he unwittingly left the northwest flank thinly held. By February 11th, Japanese troops seized Bukit Timah Heights and the island's main food depot. They had victory in the palm of their hand. Percival's water reserves fell to 1 day's supply, and at 9:30 a.m. on February 15th, 80,000 Commonwealth troops stacked rifles in the Ford factory at Bukit Timah. Bluffing with only 72 hours of ammunition left, Yamashita accepted the surrender, and Churchill called it the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. In India, the British Raj reeled. Subhas Chandra Bose's Indian National Army later allied with Japan. The fall exposed Allied weakness, emboldened Tokyo, and stretched Imperial resources thin, setting the stage for naval hubris off Malaya. February 19, 1942, 9:58 a.m. 188 carrier aircraft from Nagumo's 4 flat tops, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, descended on Darwin, Australia's northern port. The morning sky over Port Darwin was clear, the harbor crowded with 45 vessels, merchantmen, troopships, and warships, still unloading supplies for the embattled American, British, Dutch, Australian forces in the East Indies. Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers screamed down in 70-degree plunges, releasing 250-kilo bombs with whistle attachments that shrieked like banshees, shattering nerves before steel struck. Nakajima B-5N torpedo planes, nicknamed Kate, skimmed the water at 50 feet, launching Type 91 aerial torpedoes that churned white wakes toward anchored targets. USS Peary, an aging 4-Piper destroyer, took the first direct hit at 10:05 a.m. A 250-kilo bomb punched through her stack, detonated in the engine room, and triggered secondary explosions in her 4-inch magazine. Flames shot 200 feet, 88 of 143 crew perished, many burned alive as the ship rolled and sank in 12 minutes. HMAS Swan, a sloop, absorbed 3 near misses that buckled her hull. She survived barely. At 11:58 a.m., 54 land-based G4M Bettys from the Genzan and Kanoya air groups out of Ambon and Kendari arrived at 20,000 feet. High-level horizontal bombing targeted wharves, oil tanks, and the town center. 8 60-kilo bombs struck the Darwin post office at 12:05 p.m., collapsing the stone facade and killing 10 postal workers instantly. Oil storage tanks at Stokes Hill erupted in black pillars visible 50 miles away, feeding fires that raged for 2 days. Reconnaissance by Kawanishi, Jake float planes 3 days earlier, had provided exact ship positions, fuel depot coordinates, and even anti-aircraft battery locations, intelligence that turned the raid into a textbook execution of combined arms air power. In all, 683 bombs fell in 40 minutes. 8 ships sank outright. Peary, the British tanker British Motorist, the freighter Neptuna, which exploded spectacularly when her cargo of depth charges detonated, Mauna Loa, Zealandia, Barossa, and 2 smaller coasters. 4 more were beached as constructive losses. On the airfield, 30 aircraft, 11 P-40 Warhawks, 6 Hudson bombers, and assorted trainers were destroyed on the ground, many still being refueled. Total casualties, 235 killed, including 33 civilians, 300 to 400 wounded. Prime Minister John Curtin, addressing Parliament hours later, declared, "The war has come to Australia. We look to America." The raid was the first foreign attack on Australian soil. This forced Allied planners to prioritize the South Pacific, accelerating U.S. troop deployments to Brisbane. This exposed Japan's supply lines. It was overstretched. Emperor Hirohito received the first report of American bombers over the Imperial Palace. Navy Minister Admiral Shigetaro Shimada and Army Chief of Staff General Hajime Sugiyama rushed to the palace. Both insisted the attackers were carrier-launched, not land-based from the Aleutians, as initially claimed. Tokyo's newspapers was already censored, printing only minor damage by a few enemy planes. Behind closed doors, panic spread. Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, wrote in his diary,
"The enemy has struck the heart of the empire. Our people's morale is shaken."
The raid forced the recall of 2 fighter groups from the Philippines and the permanent stationing of 90 aircraft in the home islands, pilots and fuel, diverted from Rabaul and New Guinea. Most critically, Yamamoto accelerated planning for Operation Midway to destroy U.S. carriers before they could strike again. Doolittle's 16 planes had flown 6,700 miles round-trip on a shoestring. Japan now knew the Pacific was no sanctuary. For the first time in naval history, fleets 200 miles apart traded blows solely through aircraft, rewriting war doctrine overnight. From May 4th to 8th, 1942, the Coral Sea, northeast of Australia, bore the world's first carrier versus carrier duel, unfolding without surface ships firing a shot. Japan's Operation MO was launched from Rabaul, sought to outflank Australia by capturing Port Moresby on New Guinea's southern coast and Tulagi in the southern Solomons as a seaplane base. Rear Admiral Chuichi Hara's light carrier Shoho screened the invasion convoy, while Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi's heavy fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, veterans of Pearl Harbor, provided the punch with 127 aircraft. Opposing them stood Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's Task Force 17, the battle-scarred USS Yorktown, fresh from repairs after a 250-pound bomb at the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. He also had the venerable USS Lexington, Lady Lex, with her 8-inch gun turrets still mounted from her cruiser conversion. The battle opened on May 3rd, when Yorktown's SBD Dauntless dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander William O. Birch, caught Shoho at 10:40 a.m. off Mishima Island. In 4 minutes, 11 bombs and 7 torpedoes turned the 11,262-ton carrier into a pyre. Commander William B. Alt's laconic radio call, "Scratch one flat top," echoed across the task force. Shoho sank at 11:35 a.m. with 631 of her 834 crew. May 7th brought fog, rain, and chaos. U.S. scouts misidentified a tanker and Sims-class destroyer as carriers. Japanese pilots did the same, bombing the oiler Neosho and sinking destroyer Sims with 216 dead. At dawn on May 8th, both sides launched simultaneously 70 Japanese planes from Shokaku and Zuikaku against 82 Americans from Lexington and Yorktown. Lexington took 2 torpedoes on her port side at 11:20 a.m., jamming her elevators, and 2 bombs that ruptured Avgas lines. Yorktown dodged 11 torpedoes but ate an 800-pound armor-piercing bomb through her flight deck. At 12:47 p.m., vapor ignition turned Lexington into a fireball. Captain Frederick C. Sherman ordered "abandon ship" as nearly 3,000 survivors were rescued. U.S. SBDs, led by Lieutenant Commander Robert E. Dixon, found Shokaku at 10:55 a.m. 3 1,000-pound bombs shredded her deck, forcing her withdrawal. Zuikaku escaped under rain squalls, but lost 45 irreplaceable aircrew. Japan lost 1,074 men, 33 aircraft, Shoho, and destroyer Kikuzuki, and the Port Moresby invasion convoy turned back on May 9th. The U.S. mourned Lexington and 216 dead, but Yorktown limped to Pearl Harbor for repairs in 72 hours. Tactically a draw, strategically an Allied victory, Japan's carrier aircrews were irreplaceable. In June 1942, U.S. codebreakers under Commander Joseph Rochefort at Station Haipo cracked the Japanese JN-25, predicting Nagumo's strike on Midway Atoll. Working in the windowless basement of Pearl Harbor's 14th Naval District headquarters, Rochefort's sleep-deprived, chain-smoking men sustained by coffee and pineapple juice still went on to decipher 85% of Japanese naval traffic. They pinpointed AF, as Midway, through a clever ruse, Midway radioed a fake water shortage message in plain language. Japanese intercepts confirmed AF is short of water. Admiral Chester Nimitz, trusting Rochefort over Washington skeptics, laid an ambush with 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the patched-up Yorktown, against Nagumo's 4. At 4:30 a.m., June 4th, under a moonless sky, Nagumo launched 108 aircraft, 36 Kate torpedo bombers, 36 Valdive bombers, 36 Zero fighters, from Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Midway's ragtag defenders, 19 F-4F Wildcats, 7 F-2A Buffaloes, 30 Dauntlesses, 6 obsolete Vindicators, scrambled at 5:55 a.m., clawing for altitude. American torpedo squadrons struck first. Torpedo 8 from Hornet, led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, flew low at 100 feet. 15 TBD Devastators, lumbering at 120 miles per hour, 15 miles per hour, slower rate of climb than the Zero's 3,100 feet per minute, were shredded. Zeros dove like hawks. 29 of 30 airmen died, including Waldron. Torpedo 6 and Torpedo 3 followed, losing 11 of 12 and 10 of 14 planes. The sacrifice pulled the Japanese Combat Air Patrol down to sea level. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's 30 SBD Dauntlesses from Enterprise, climbing at 1,600 feet per minute, emerged from a cloud at 19,000 feet. Spotting Akagi's red sun deck, McCluskey rolled into a 70-degree dive. 3 500-pound bombs struck Akagi at 10:26 a.m., one through the elevator, detonating amid armed torpedoes. Kaga took 4 hits in seconds. Soryu absorbed 3. All 3 carriers became infernos. Unscathed, Hiryu launched 18 Vals and 6 Zeros, mortally wounding Yorktown with 3 bombs and 2 torpedoes. Enterprise and Yorktown Dauntlesses found Hiryu at 5 p.m., and 4 bombs sealed her fate. By dusk, June 7th, cruiser Mikuma lay sinking, torpedoed by Dauntlesses. Japan lost 3,057 men, including 120 irreplaceable pilots. America mourned 307. The victory halted Japanese expansion, avenged Pearl Harbor, and shifted momentum. Nagumo's survivors whispered the war had turned, and morale was never the same. In July 1942, Allied intelligence spotted Japanese engineers carving an airstrip on Guadalcanal's north coast, Lunga Point. Australian coast watchers perched in the island's volcanic highlands first radioed cryptic sightings of many men with machines on June 19th. By July 6th, B-17 reconnaissance flights from Port Moresby confirmed a 3,600-foot coral runway taking shape amid coconut groves. Codenamed Cactus, the airfield, if completed, would place Rabaul-based bombers within 560 miles of Espiritu Santo and 1,200 miles of Australia's supply convoys to Hawaii, slicing the Allied lifeline. In Washington, Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, pounded the table during a July 8th Joint Chiefs meeting. Take it before they finish it. Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, concurred, greenlighting Operation Watchtower, the first American amphibious offensive of the war, despite only 60 days to prepare. Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's Task Force 61, with carriers Saratoga, Enterprise, and Wasp, were screened by Battleship North Carolina and 10 cruisers. They escorted Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner's amphibious force. Aboard 23 transports rode Major General Alexander A. Vandegrift's 1st Marine Division. 11,000 men of the 1st, 5th, and 7th Marines, plus Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson's 1st Raider Battalion, elite scouts trained in hit-and-run jungle warfare at Quantico. Just handed the operation only on July 26th, Vandegrift strongly protested the lack of rehearsal. His men had to train en route with rope ladders and mock Higgins boats off Fiji. On August 7, 1942, at 6:14 a.m., cruisers Quincy, Vincennes, and Astoria opened with 8-inch salvos, hurling 1,500 shells in 30 minutes onto Red Beach and Tulagi. At 9:10 a.m., 82 plywood Higgins boats, each carrying 36 Marines, grounded on Guadalcanal's black volcanic sand. Japanese construction troops, 2,230 laborers and engineers under Captain Kanai Monzen, dropped shovels and fled inland, leaving behind steamrollers, 300 tons of rice, 80 trucks, and a half-built control tower. By 4 p.m., Colonel Clifton B. Cates' 1st Marines raised the stars and stripes over the abandoned airstrip, promptly renamed Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton Henderson, killed at Midway. Nightfall brought anxiety. Fletcher, citing 20% aircraft losses and dwindling fuel, withdrew his carriers at 6:30 p.m., August 8th, abandoning Turner's 58 transports, still half unloaded. Only 1,400 tons of the planned 2,900 tons of ammunition, food, and barbed wire reached the beach. Marines dug foxholes with bayonets, counting 90-millimeter shells by hand. Yet the gamble paid. America now held a toehold 5,600 miles from Tokyo, but the Imperial Navy was already steaming south. August 7, 1942, 6:14 a.m. Under a tropical dawn, USS Quincy's 8-inch guns thundered, hurling 260-pound shells onto Guadalcanal's Red Beach. The bombardment was coordinated with cruisers Vincennes and Astoria, unleashing 1,200 rounds in 26 minutes, churning palm groves into smoke and splinters. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis B. Chesty Puller's 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, splashed ashore unopposed, Japanese laborers scattering into kunai grass. The 1,100 men waded through knee-deep surf, M1 Garands held high, expecting machine gun fire that never came. By 10:30 a.m., 6,075 Marines secured a 3,000-yard beachhead, marked by red flags and the first American flag raised on foreign soil since 1898. Across Sea Lark Channel, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson's 1st Raider Battalion stormed Tulagi's Coral Pier at 7:50 a.m. 346 Japanese Special Naval Landing Force defenders, dug into caves and concrete bunkers, fought room by room with Type 92 machine guns and bayonets. Flamethrowers and satchel charges cleared 42 positions. Only 3 Japanese surrendered, one shouting "Banzai" before seppuku. Engineers found 2,000 tons of rice in bamboo sheds, 80 Nissan trucks with keys and ignitions, and a half-built 3,600-foot runway of crushed coral, 80% complete, ringed by drainage ditches. But Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's carriers, Enterprise, Saratoga, Wasp, withdrew at 6:30 p.m. August 8th, citing 20% aircraft losses and fuel below 50%. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner's 23 transports sailed at midnight, leaving half the planned load, 1,400 tons of supplies stacked on Red Beach under tarps. Marines dug in with 14 days' rations, no heavy artillery, and 90mm anti-aircraft ammo counted by hand, 11,392 rounds total. At 2 a.m., August 9th, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's cruiser force loomed. August 9th, 1942, 1:15 a.m. Mikawa's 8 ships, 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, destroyer Unagi, slipped down the slot at 26 knots. The moonless night cloaked their 26,000-ton force as it knifed through black water, lookouts straining through binoculars while American picket destroyers patrolled lazily, their new SG radar sets hampered by inexperience and flickering screens. USS Blue's operator logged an intermittent blip at 1:38 a.m., 11 miles out, but the warning, relayed through 3 ships, arrived garbled as unidentified aircraft. Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner's flagship, Macaulay, never sounded general quarters. At 1:43 a.m., 8 277-pound shells, screaming at 2,700 feet per second, slammed into USS Quincy's bridge through Chokai's opening 8-inch broadside, killing Captain Samuel N. Moore instantly and igniting ready ammunition. Within seconds, Aoba's torpedoes streaked toward USS Vincennes. Long Lance Type 93 warheads detonated against her port side, lifting the 9,400-ton cruiser bodily before she settled by the stern. Astoria absorbed 65 hits in 12 minutes, her magazines erupting in orange fireballs visible up to 20 miles away. The Australian heavy cruiser Canberra took 24 shells and 2 torpedoes, Captain Frank getting ordered, "Abandon ship" at 5:30 a.m., and destroyers Ellis and Patterson scuttled her with torpedoes to prevent capture. Total Allied dead were 1,077 Americans, 939 Australians, many trapped below decks, scalded by ruptured steam lines or incinerated in oil-fired infernos. Mikawa, aboard Chokai's Compass Bridge, watched the carnage through night glasses and calculated risk. Dawn was 4 hours away, and Henderson Field's rumored aircraft could strike at first light. At 2:20 a.m., he signaled withdrawal, leaving 58 transports, carrying 9,000 tons of marine supplies, untouched in Sea Lark Channel. The Japanese lost none that night, but fate caught Kako the next morning. USS 44's Mark 10 torpedoes struck her engine room off Kavieng at 7:55 a.m., August 10th, sending the 5,800-ton cruiser to the bottom in 8 minutes with 68 crew. The disaster was the worst U.S. Navy defeat since 1812, and it left Marines isolated, yet Japanese restraint preserved Henderson Field's garrison. On August 20th, 1st Marine fighters in 19 F-4F Wildcats, 12 SBD Dauntlesses, landed from escort carrier Long Island, forming the Cactus Air Force. Iron Bottom Sound's graveyard grew, but the airstrip breathed life into the campaign. By August 1942, the conflict was fiercest in Guadalcanal's jungle. Dense kunai grass, mangrove swamps, 90% humidity that swallowed patrols. The air hung thick with the stench of rotting vegetation and unburied corpses. Leeches clung to every ankle, and sudden downpours turned trails into quagmires. Marines were issued 1917 bolt-action Springfields with 220 grain bullets, but they faced Type 38 Arisaka rifles, lighter, faster cycling, and the dreaded Type 99 light machine guns that spat 7.7 millimeter rounds at 700 per minute. On August 12th, Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's 915-man detachment, vanguard of the 28th Infantry, landed silently at Taivu Point, 22 miles east, under a moonless sky. Fresh from Guam's easy victory where 400 defenders surrendered in hours, Ichiki believed 2,000 Americans held the perimeter. Intelligence from Tokyo assured him the Marines were demoralized and undersupplied. At 3 a.m., August 21st, his Ichiki detachment charged across the Tanaru River's narrow sandbar in 3 waves, bayonets fixed, screaming, "Banzai!" Marine .30 caliber water-cooled M1917 Brownings, pre-sighted at 600 yards with tracer rounds every 5th bullet, opened at 200 yards. The riverbank erupted in orange muzzle flashes. Platoon Sergeant Anthony P. Malinowski's 37mm M3 anti-tank guns fired canister rounds, each packed with 122 steel balls, shredding ranks like grape shot. By dawn, 777 Japanese lay dead in grotesque piles, including Ichiki, who knelt and detonated a Type 97 grenade against his chest. 15 Marines died, 22 were wounded. Atrocities emerged, bayoneted prisoners, ears and fingers severed as trophies, mutilated bodies left as warnings. Sergeant Major Jacob Vusa, a 42-year-old Solomon Islands constable and coast watcher, was captured August 20th while scouting Japanese positions. Bound to a coconut tree, he was bayoneted 11 times in the chest and throat for refusing to reveal Marine lines. Left for dead, he chewed through his ropes with broken teeth and crawled 3 miles through crocodile-infested swamps to reach Edson's raiders at 2 a.m., August 21st, gasping coordinates that saved the eastern flank. Awarded the Silver Star and later the British George Medal, Vusa survived to see liberation, but the jungle exacted tolls beyond bullets. August 21st to September 14th, 1942. The Tenaru slaughter stunned Tokyo. Commanding the 17th Army at Rabaul General Harukichi Hyakutake refused to believe a single Marine regiment had annihilated Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's elite 2,300-man detachment. On August 25th, he airlifted the Kawaguchi Brigade under Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi, 6,000 veterans of the Shanghai and Malaya campaigns, ordering them to annihilate the Lunga garrison in one blow. Kawaguchi's plan was audacious, split into 3 columns, converge on Henderson Field from the south through trackless jungle, strike at midnight, September 12th. For 5 days his men hacked through vines with bayonets, subsisting on 3 rice balls each. 1,200 collapsed from exhaustion before reaching the ridge. On September 12th, Kawaguchi's 1st Battalion of 600 men emerged from the kunai grass onto Bloody Ridge Hill, 123, a knife-edged coral spine 1,000 yards south of Henderson's runway. At 9:30 p.m., signal bugles blared the attack. Banzai! Waves crashed against Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson's 830 Raiders and Paramarines. Edson had pulled his line back 200 yards at dusk, creating a killing pocket. Bar gunners fired tracers every 5th round to walk fire across the slope. 60mm mortars dropped WP shells that ignited grass and flesh alike. 105mm howitzers of the 11th Marines, dragged forward by hand, fired beehive rounds, nails and flechettes at 300 yards. Sergeant John Barcelona's 4 water-cooled M1917 on the left flank poured out 25,000 rounds in 6 hours. Crews had to urinate on glowing barrels to cool them. Japanese bodies piled 3 deep in the wire, and survivors used corpses as ramps. By 4 a.m., September 14th, 600 attackers lay dead or dying. Edson's losses were 59 men, with 194 wounded. Kawaguchi radioed Rabaul from his culvert hideout, "Enemy resistance beyond expectation. Attack failed." 6 weeks later, on October 23rd, Colonel Masao Oka's 2,200 men of the 124th Regiment probed the Matanikau River mouth west of the perimeter. Lieutenant Colonel Louis B. Chesty, Puller's 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, waited in ambush. At 4 a.m., Oka's lead company crossed the sandbar. Puller's 37mm anti-tank guns, loaded with canister, fired at 50 yards, scything entire platoons. Machine gun crews swept the far bank. Mortars walked fire inland. Private Al Schmid, manning a .30 caliber on the right, took a grenade burst that shredded his eyes. Guided by his loader's voice, he kept the trigger down, killing an estimated 200. By dawn, 139 Japanese were dead. 26 Marines fell. Each ridge bought time, but malaria hospitalized 1 in 3 Marines weekly. From September to October 1942, Guadalcanal's lifeline stretched 5,600 miles to Noumea, New Caledonia. Every crate of .30 caliber ammunition, every can of Spam, every ampule of morphine had to survive U-boat-infested waters, typhoon swells, and Japanese air patrols before reaching the island's blood-soaked perimeter. Destroyer transports, the Guadalcanal ferry, slipped out of Espiritu Santo, 600 miles southeast, under cover of darkness, racing at 30 knots to unload 50 tons of cargo in 45-minute windows, while 0 fighters strafed the anchorage. By September 15th, Marines held 10 days' rations, captured Japanese rice, steamed in rusted helmets over coconut husk fires, earning the sardonic nickname Tokyo Fried Rice. Malaria exploded to 1,000 cases weekly by October. The 1st Marine Division's hospital on Tulagi overflowed with men shaking in 104 degrees Fahrenheit fevers. Quinine stocks dwindled to 5,000 tablets. Corpsmen rationed 1 pill per man every 3rd day, issuing salt tablets to combat dehydration, while jungle rot turned boots into festering prisons. Men lost 20 pounds in weeks, their cheekbones sharpening under mosquito netting. Japanese troops fared worse. The sleek destroyers from Rabaul, Tokyo Express, landed 900 men nightly at Cape Esperance, but rarely with food. Supplies were jettisoned to make room for reinforcements. Crates of rice sank in Iron Bottom Sound. Colonel Akinosuke Oka's 124th Regiment, arriving October 14th aboard destroyers Akatsuki and Ikazuchi, received 12 rice balls per man for a 10-day march, each ball the size of a child's fist. Scurvy blackened gums, beriberi swelled legs until skin split. At Coley Point, Marines found diaries tucked in blood-stained haversacks. No rice for 3 days, eating grass and insects. My legs no longer obey. Their power dwindled, the end was near. But men die first before the empire. On November 4th, Private First Class Shigeru Mizuki surrendered at the Tenaru River, weighing 78 pounds. His ribs visible beneath translucent skin, he whispered, "I only want water." Both sides bled from logistics. Starvation became the silent killer, tougher than steel. August 20th, 1942, 19 F-4F, Wildcats and 12 SBD Dauntlesses of the Cactus Air Force roared off Henderson Field's Coral Runway, pitted with bomb craters. The strip was carved from coconut plantations and hastily graded by Seabees using captured Japanese rollers. It measured just 3,800 feet, barely enough for a fully loaded Dauntless. Coral dust billowed like smoke as engines screamed to 1,200 horsepower, pilots wrestling sticks against cross winds, gusting off iron-bottom sound. Every takeoff risked a crater or a buried, unexploded 500-pound bomb. Japanese reconnaissance flew daily. Kawanishi E-13 A-Jake float planes from Rakata Bay, 180 miles north, photographed the perimeter at 20,000 feet. Launched from cruisers or shore catapults, these slow fabric-winged scouts carried a single 7.7 millimeter machine gun and a crew of 3. Their long-range cameras, Zeiss lenses smuggled before the war, snapped overlapping plates of the Lunga perimeter, revealing tent lines, fuel dumps, and the precious revetments protecting the Wildcats. Developed in dark rooms aboard seaplane tenders, the Prince reached Rabaul within 24 hours, guiding the next day's strikes. At 11:45 a.m., August 24th, 21 A6M0s, escorting 18 G4M Bettys, struck. The Bettys, flying at 20,000 feet in tight V formations, released 60-kilogram bombs that walked across the runway like giant footsteps. Captain Marion Carl's VMF 223 Wildcats climbed at 2,500 feet per minute, gaining altitude advantage. Carl, already with 5 kills from Midway, led a section in a high-side attack, diving through the escort screen. His 50-caliber tracers stitched the lead Betty's wing route. Fuel ignited, and the bomber spiraled into Sealark Channel. In 15 minutes, 11 Japanese planes fell, 6 Zeros, 5 Bettys, 3 Wildcats lost, with 1 pilot bailing out over Florida Island. On October 2nd, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Bauer dove through 27 Zeros to land a damaged F-4F, saving his pilot. Bauer, commanding VMF 212, spotted a flaming Wildcat limping back at 500 feet. Ignoring radio calls to break off, he plunged from 15,000 feet, guns silent to conserve ammo, and formate on the crippled fighter. Zeros swarmed. Bauer jinked, then throttled back to match speed, guiding the rookie to a water landing near Tulagi. He earned the Medal of Honor posthumously as he was shot down weeks later over the slot. The P-400 Airacobras shipped from Australia proved sluggish above 12,000 feet. Exported models of the P-39, they lacked superchargers and carried a 37mm cannon that jammed after 3 rounds in humidity. Pilots cursed their 1,800 feet per minute climb rate against Zeros that could loop above them in seconds. Daily sorties averaged 40. Pilots flew 4 missions, sleeping under wings on coral gravel, swatting mosquitoes between alerts. Mechanics worked by flashlight, patching bullet holes with beer cans and baling wire. By November, 1,200 Japanese aircraft attacked in waves of 50 or more, twice daily. Only 89 reached the field, the rest shredded by the growing cactus umbrella. Wildcat pilots claimed 173 kills. Dauntless gunners added 42. Reconnaissance photos guided every raid until Marine night fighters began hunting Jakes. On November 10th, Captain Joe Foss, already an ace, led 2 F-4Fs on a midnight patrol. Using crude radar vectors from a SCR-270 set on Tulagi, they intercepted a Jake at 8,000 feet. A 3-second burst from Foss's 6.5s sent it flaming into the sea, the first night kill over Guadalcanal. From that night on, the Jakes flew higher, then not at all. The eyes of the enemy were blinded, and Henderson Field breathed free. But the Japanese were not known to be quitters even in heavy defeat. In October 1942, Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka's 8th Fleet ran the Tokyo Express, high-speed destroyer convoys from Rabaul, 560 miles north. At 30 knots, they landed troops at Tassafaronga after dark, shelling Henderson Field en route. On October 13th, the Battleship Express arrived. Rear Admiral Takatsugu Jojima escorted battleships Congo and Haruna, and lobbed 973 14-inch Type 3 incendiary shells in 90 minutes. Fires lit the sky. 41 Marines died. 27 aircraft burned. Cactus pilots flew at dawn with half fuel. 15,000 troops of General Maruyama's 2nd Division landed. And on October 24th, the Cactus Night saw cruiser Sendai and destroyers Umikaze, Kawakaze, and Tanakaze, dual USS Helena's radar-directed 6-inch guns off Cape Esperance. Helena sank destroyer Yura. Japanese lost 553 men, and 3 ships were damaged. Night after night, the slot churned with torpedoes and searchlights. American radar versus Japanese optics. By November, 29 destroyers were sunk or crippled. Iron Bottom Sound claimed 60 ships total. From November 12 to 15, 1942, the naval battle of Guadalcanal shattered Japan's last offensive. Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan's Task Force 67.4 of cruisers San Francisco, Portland, and destroyers. They met Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's battleships Hiei and Kirishima off Lunga Point at 1:24 a.m., November 13th. Radar-guided 8-inch salvos crippled Hiei. She sank that afternoon after 85 bomb hits from Enterprise SBDs, and unfortunately, Callahan died aboard San Francisco. On November 14th, Rear Admiral Willis A. Lee's battleships Washington and South Dakota dueled Kirishima at 11 p.m. Washington's 16-inch radar-directed broadsides sank her in 7 minutes. Japan lost 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, 1,900 men. U.S. losses, 3 destroyers, 1,700 dead. By December, Hyakutake's 17th Army, down to 11,000 effectives, received orders to evacuate. Operation K, January 14th to February 7th, 1943, used 21 destroyers in 3 nightly runs, extracting 10,652 troops from Cape Esperance under air cover. Marines watched silent pickets vanish into jungle. On February 9th, Patch's 14th Corps raised the flag over Tassafaronga. Guadalcanal was America's. The Japanese incurred a devastating loss after loss, but they just won't give up. In February 9, 1943, Major General Alexander Patch radioed Halsey, "Tokyo Express no longer has a terminus on Guadalcanal." The 6-month campaign cost America 7,100 dead, 1,600 ground, 4,900 naval, 600 air, 29 ships, and 615 aircraft. Japan lost 31,000 men, 8,500 battle deaths, and 22,500 from disease or starvation, 38 ships, 683 aircraft, mostly irreplaceable veterans. Henderson Field launched 2,000 sorties by January. The Cactus Air Force destroyed 250 Japanese planes. The victory secured Australia, severed Rabaul's supply line, and forced Yamamoto to cancel New Guinea offensives. On March 25, 1943, Emperor Hirohito's liaison conference admitted the Solomons were lost. The defensive perimeter shrank to the Marianas. MacArthur's cartwheel advanced, New Georgia, July 20th, Bougainville November 1st. Guadalcanal proved amphibious warfare could seize and hold islands. It birthed the Central Pacific Drive under Nimitz. Japanese morale cracked. Soldiers' letters home begged for rice. The campaign's crucible forged marine tactics, radar gunnery, and carrier doctrine that carried to Okinawa, all beginning from Doolittle's Raid. The Doolittle Raid's psychological shockwave reshaped imperial planning. On April 29, 1942, 11 days after Tokyo's bombing, Yamamoto issued Combined Fleet Secret Order 18, accelerating Operation MI to seize Midway and lure U.S. carriers into annihilation. The raid's proof that American flat tops could strike 600 miles from Japan forced the diversion of 2 destroyer divisions and 36 Zero fighters to the home islands, thinning Rabaul's air cover. When Midway failed on June 7th, the Solomons became Japan's next priority. On July 11th, the 17th Army received orders to complete Guadalcanal's airfield by August 7th, exactly the day Marines landed. Tokyo's overreaction to Doolittle created a strategic vacuum, carrier air groups depleted at Coral Sea and Midway, with ground troops scattered from Java to Alaska. Guadalcanal's seizure exploited this fracture. By October, Yamamoto admitted in a staff meeting, "The raid planted the seed of our defeat." The 80 airmen who flew from Hornet had, without firing a shot in the Solomons, tilted the Pacific chessboard. Marshall's global vision fused disparate allies into a single fist. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, he and General Sir Alan Brooke locked eyes with Churchill and Roosevelt, demanding unconditional surrender. The combined chiefs of staff, American, British, Canadian, Australian, met weekly in Washington's Public Health Building. Marshall's Lend-Lease pipeline delivered 17,000 aircraft, 3,000 tanks, and 1.5 million rifles to the USSR by 1943. Convoys PQ-17 and PQ-18 braved Arctic waters despite 24 U-boats. In the Pacific, Australian 7th and 9th Divisions fought under MacArthur at Boona. New Zealand's 3rd Division seized Vella La Vella. Free French battalions landed on New Caledonia. Chinese troops under General Stilwell tied down 600,000 Japanese in Burma. Marshall's daily cable traffic, coded magic intercepts, kept Nimitz and MacArthur synchronized. On Guadalcanal, a British coast watcher, Martin Clemens, radioed Japanese ship movements from hilltops. By 1943, 29 nations flew the United Nations flag. Marshall's coalition turned Doolittle's spark into a global inferno. Can the United States still surprise her enemies today with overwhelming military might, backed with her devastating industrial firepower? What do you think?